The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Stephen Sakach, joined by Tullio Siragusa, and today's conversation focuses on a topic that affects us all, but is rarely talked about in the workplace, and that's bereavement. And consider this, 1 in 9 employees in the United States experiences the death of a loved one each year, and yet 51% of those employees leave their job within 12 months after the loss, according to the Harvard Business Review. And on our podcast, this topic alone is enough to get us interested, but for those curious, the financial impact is just as significant, with grief-related losses costing U.S. businesses over $75 billion annually, according to the Grief Recovery Institute. And our guest today is someone who is changing the way we think about grief at work. Tullio, introduce our guest today.
Absolutely. We're excited to welcome to the podcast Justin Clifford, who is the CEO of Bereave, which is a platform dedicated to helping businesses support employees through the most difficult times in their lives. Justin's journey is one of transformation, moving from a career in education to becoming a sales leader and now a first-time CEO. Congratulations. His mission is very clear. Bring compassion, clarity, and support to workplaces where grief is often ignored. Justin, it's really an honor to have you here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really honored to step in with you guys for a few minutes today.
Yeah, Justin, I think companies somewhat are familiar with having a bereavement policy, on paper, but few have a real system supporting grieving employees. Can you share how Bereave is helping companies kind of go beyond the basics to support their teams?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think having a structure, a playbook, some might call it a roadmap, right? A framework, whatever you want to call it, whatever your name is for your processes. This topic is often overlooked when you think about business processes, and what ends up happening, the result of not having that is what we refer to as random acts of bereavement support. So you've got an HR teammate that's doing something, you've got a manager that might be doing something, maybe just ushering somebody, a teammate that needs a hand over to HR. Somebody sends flowers, somebody sends you to the EAP, you're back in 3 to 5 days and you're back in full production is the concept, right? In reality, we have developed and happy to share with anybody a framework for this, but we've developed a playbook for HR leaders and for managers to follow, as well as playbooks for families of employees to be able to follow in the moments of loss. So really giving people something to hold on to at the moment of impact, and really helping guide the way, whether it's somebody that is offering support to that employee who has suffered a loss, or it's that employee themselves and their family.
I like that concept you mentioned, like random acts of bereavement. And this is really when we're talking about bliss for us, build love into scalable systems. It's really moving those random acts into more of a systemized approach, so that you're doing this continually, and it's not just a one-off, and it's not just that one person who is, lights up the room always, or right. Has that empathy with them. It's becomes more of a system, and everyone's sort of prompted and understands, this is the best way, a best practice, and kind of caring for things. So it's interesting. Yeah, you bring that up because that's what we talk about all the time, is building systems of compassion, really.
Yeah. And in reality, it's not that difficult, right? I probably shouldn't say that about something we're selling, but in general, it takes some thoughtfulness. It takes listening to trends. It takes listening to people's stories, all kind of hard things to do, especially when you're talking about stories about loss and grief and trauma sometimes. But in reality, what we have been able to do is actually take those stories and build them into our platform so that we can work to kind of eradicate the really bad stories we hear from the world, but also bring in and build around some of the beautiful stories that we hear that have meant a lot to employees in their workplace.
So this is a very personal topic. Grief is very personal, but it can have significant impact on our professional lives. Personally speaking, both times I lost my parents, I was just starting a startup and I gave up on it. So it had a dramatic impact personally. So what are some of the biggest mistakes you see companies make when it comes to handling bereavement?
Yeah, I think there are probably three off the top of my head. One is avoidance, right? Just acting like it doesn't exist or that it doesn't happen. And I've had people tell me death doesn't happen here. I think two is training and education. And this doesn't have to be, people don't need to be, grief certified. They don't need to be counselors. They don't need to be therapists, but they do have to have call it just a 101 foundational understanding of how grief shows up at work, symptoms of grief, things like that. And I think the third biggest mistake is just kind of rubber stamping it year over year, because most of the policies that are in place and most of the support systems are in place are mechanisms that were built really in the 1970s around allowing somebody to go to a funeral. Like that was what bereavement leave was. And what bereavement leave is today, kind of the state of the state, is that still that 3 to 5 days of time off. And then, throwing an EAP. So sending somebody to an 800 number to have them, go find who's available for support, for delivering support, which can take up to 6, 7, 8 weeks sometimes, and sending flowers. And that's kind of the state of the state. And in reality, what people want are managers that are prepared. They want to feel like they aren't a burden, that they aren't an inconvenience. They want to be welcomed back to their workplace in a manner that's not going to leave them alone and feeling alienated. And those things are all drivers of why that 51% statistic exists. And when somebody suffers the loss of a loved one, a lot of things can change. And we don't think that 51% should be a 0%, right? It can't be, right? People's lives change, perspectives change, financial arrangements change, responsibilities change. But overwhelmingly what we hear are the stories of mishandling these situations in the workplace, and that drives people out the door.
You said something really interesting about feeling like a burden or feeling the pressure of not being as useful as you could be because you're dealing with grief. And I remember feeling that. Is that something that the individual really, is that something they feel internally, or is that actually kind of like because of the lack of empathy, something that's actually being experienced? I've always wondered whether it was just in my head or people are actually like, oh, great. And now they're not going to be useful to us because they just lost someone. I'm just curious, based on some study of statistics, what you're seeing, how much of that is in your mind and how much of that is real.
Yeah, there's probably equal parts of all of it, I would imagine, right? And I think one of the reasons for that is because the experience is very unique. Everybody's situation is different. There are a lot of similarities, but everyone's different because we're humans and we have different perspectives and different experiences, and all of those things fill into how we react in this moment. And not just in this moment, but think about 6, 9, 12 months from now, when grief might actually show up for people. And these experiences, right, are very misunderstood. So what ends up happening is that sometimes employers don't understand symptoms that show up 6, 9 months from now, and they aren't able to tie it back to that cause. But at the same time, there are people that get back from bereavement leave. We have dozens, maybe hundreds of stories in our LinkedIn inboxes about people returning back to bereavement leave and being treated differently, not supported well, and sometimes even let go, weeks, months after a pretty traumatic loss.
I think a lot of times managers might just not be comfortable with it. They might be overwhelmed, right? How can managers be trained to kind of support the grieving employees without feeling overwhelmed themselves?
Yeah, it's a great. So first and foremost, like, you don't need to be a Bereave customer to do this, right? There are speakers, there are consultants, there are YouTube videos. Like, you could do it for free, right? Just get your managers together and do a little bit of a lunch and learn. Have us come in and talk to folks if you want. Be a customer of Bereave and have the manager training that we provide. We provide self-guided training, but also we are doing seven sessions this year where we're actually hiring subject matter experts to come in and do live workshops with our customers. There's just a lot to do, right? There's a lot you can do. There's no, silver bullet here. I think the hardest part is getting started, just like an exercise routine or a diet, right? You have to be able to have the courage to go and start the conversation that is typically a really difficult conversation to have, which is one of the things that we are working to help workplaces overcome is making that conversation just a little bit easier so that they can relate to and support their employees in those moments. So that management layer is a key to this. Happy to provide a lot of resources to anybody who wants those resources. They're not hard to find, by the way. So
well,
again,
it's not like you're asking an arm and a leg for your services either. I mean, let people know, what are your pricing for what you offer? I thought
the pricing that for Bereave customer.
Yeah.
Very straightforward. So it's $100 a month for up to 1,200 employees. Very simple, easy to do. Run it on a credit card. Discount it for annual payments.
A huge amount here that they, I'm going to need to run around and piecemeal this together from YouTube and all these different places. You've got, you've developed the system. So
we have the system. We have the subject matter experts that we bring in. We're just getting started, as a startup who, launched a prototype last January, in January 24, and just publicly launched our actual software platform at the end of February. So we have lots to do and a lot more to offer, and pricing probably will change to reflect that at some point. But today it's a low cost, low lift, high impact type of thing that again is not it can be done outside of Bereave with a little bit of forethought and a little bit of time, or you could just hire us. That either way works as long as you do something.
Yeah, I think there's the Grief Recovery Institute's found that 85% of companies have no formal process for supporting grieving employees, and this sounds like this is an easy turnkey related kind of system for people. Could you maybe go into a little bit about what that involves for someone onboarding with Bereave?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, so it takes about an hour to implement Bereave. And at the very beginning, what we encourage our new customers to do is spend time rolling out to managers and having the managers go through a little bit of self-guided, like 101 type of training, right? 15, 20 minutes per manager, maybe. Some of our customers have actually done some cool stuff where they actually pulled managers into a room, and they review it together and they ask questions and start the dialogue internally, right? After that, getting the platform in the hands of employees and making sure that employees know how to share with their families, because that's a big component here, right? When you think about Bereave, we really think about creating a support system. All the pieces are in place, but the connective tissue for those for that support system is often missing. So if you can pull in the manager, pull in HR business partners or head of HR, if you can pull in family and friends with the employee, now you're starting to create one common language, a common framework, and a common place to go that will really bring that support system together. So we make sure all of that is kind of in place, and then really make it easy to access the platform when people need it.
So I'm wondering if we could just backtrack a little bit, let's rewind
a
little bit. maybe tell us about like what should be some things that are in place. What should managers do? What do they need to learn? And then how to, how does Bereave bring that into focus? Like some basic, like, I don't know, 5 things you should know, be aware of. I'm guessing a lot of people just don't know, like, so they don't know how to respond so let's start with that. What's like must-haves, if you will?
Yeah. We think the 3 must-haves to get started and what we encourage our customers to spend time on are kind of like these 3 self-guided sections inside of the platform. 1, understanding empathy and compassion in general, right? And then also how it applies to work. So we have a couple of we have a partner that you also know who is in our platform that does a 2 or 3 minute video about this. And then we've got a little bit of content, like just very much getting started to understand why these things are important. Secondarily, we help managers understand the impact of grief at work. What are the symptoms of grief? What does it look like? How to recognize it if somebody might be experiencing these things and not communicating their grief. And ultimately what to say, what to do, and what to not say and what not to do. So getting very, very tactical and helping them understand just some of that common language that they can use that will help really pull an employee close versus kind of push them away.
For our audience right now, what are some signs that an employee might be struggling with grief, even if they haven't directly shared it?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at some of the symptoms of grief, they're both mental and physical, right? There's a mental toll with things like sadness. It might feel like depression. It might emerge to an observer as sadness or darkness or things like that aren't typically there, and those things start to show up a little bit. But then there's also these physical there are physical symptoms, things like change of appetite, things like nausea, things that are typical to other illnesses that are driven by grief. So when you start to observe things like an employee talking about them not feeling well and some of the symptoms that they might have, you might start to kind of piece this together. And instead of like pushing somebody to a doctor to go, get a checkup, maybe now you're starting to build a little bit of maybe a line of questioning that might help them be okay with sharing about grief that they are experiencing.
How do you help companies kind of balance providing support without overstepping or making employees feel pressured to share?
A big part of that is providing some sort of self-guided information, right? So it's starting there. It's like, hey,
so they're able to go through themselves by themselves.
By themselves and invite family, and then the employer may never know about it. That happens a lot, right? I mean, some of the more progressive HR folks that we talk to say things like, hey, we had 100 people that we know about suffer a loss last year, right? And there's always that caveat of that we know about. There, especially when it comes to like things like pregnancy loss, right? Not brought up all the time because for a variety of reasons that we don't need to get into, but that specifically is one where you've got people suffering in silence and might need the support, don't know where to turn. They don't want to talk to their employer, but they need the resources. And in this case, the employer would get credit for providing those resources, right? So I think that's a big part of that, is making sure that there is self-guided information at the very least, even if it's just getting people to an EAP or other resources that you have available if it's not Bereave.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So true. Even losing a pet could be devastating to most people, but there's nothing in place where you could have bereavement over the loss of a pet, which is kind of sad.
Yeah. Our platform has a ton around pets because we get asked about pets and pregnancy loss the most. Pets is a huge one, and you can debate the merit all day, but we have heard people over and over and over say, I would grieve the loss of my pet way more than I would almost all of the humans in my life. Right. So I think it's a very valid point.
Our 17-year-old dog, I think I mentioned this on the last podcast. Our 17-year-old dog got out, and he hasn't done this for a long time, and just flipped out, or groceries were being brought in, and disappeared. And the panic that kind of set in, and the neighbors mobilizing and everyone looking for him.
That's amazing.
But it was this real thing, and my wife saw, this can't be the way he goes after all this.
Yeah, after all this.
We've got an
Came back,
question.
right? I got him back. I hope.
Yeah, we got him back. Everything's fine.
Okay,
about
good.
half an hour, but he's a small
Good.
guy, and I know at dusk the coyotes come into the neighborhood, so it was just like we've got a limited time.
Mad dash.
Yeah, to get this off.
Yeah, the coyotes are a real problem in Orange County. We bought a nice house with a yard, and we were like, oh, the dog could play there. And then I saw coyotes. I'm like, that's not going to happen.
not so much. Not so
much. We have an audience question here, which is a great question. I think very timely too in our discussion. Justin, I would love to know what inspired you to start the company.
Yeah, well, in a weird we don't have the typical startup structure. I did not start Bereave. We've got a couple of co-founders who asked me to come in and help them kind of guide the ship. Very honored to be able to do that, because two of them lost parents prematurely, and then through their friendship and navigating their own respective loss journeys, started going through a system of loss that is I'm going to say the word broken, but really it's broken because it tends to just perpetuate pain in a lot of ways. Technology is mostly absent from that grieving experience. And so they started poking around and figured out, hey, like this should be a better experience. Why isn't it a better experience? And so that's about the time that they kind of pulled me in, and we started having a lot of conversations with people who have suffered loss. People were raising their hands that wanted to tell us about their person. And inevitably we heard two things over and over and over, which was, I didn't know where to turn when we lost our person. And two, here's what my manager and here's what my employer did, which was a really weird thing to be talking about work when you're talking about your person, right? And so as we kind of worked through the concepts of creating a better system of loss, it became very clear that working with employers to be able to provide a better experience not only is beneficial to them as employers, but also can really, really help the grieving process in that journey.
Speaking of work, a report by Deloitte found that purpose-driven companies experience 40% higher employee retention. How does having, for example, a clear purpose around bereavement support help companies not only retain talent, but also build a more compassionate culture? Any stats?
I probably wouldn't throw a ton of stats at that specific question. I think bereavement is a part of that broader picture that you just painted, right? The way a company shows up in difficult moments of an employee's life says a lot about who that company really is.
True.
And if you spend any time on people's company career pages or culture pages, you're going to see a lot of that kind of language. But when you get into it, there aren't a lot of signals in a lot of these companies that show that they are actually going to walk the walk. This is one of those signals. The way people handle hardship, and that doesn't have to just be death, right? That can be all sorts of hardship that happens. Life happens. There's some crummy stuff that happens in life, right? How can a company support those employees during those crummy times? Says a lot about how that company is going to show up for the foreseeable future to support their teammates.
Yeah, I think the future of business is going to be all around, more of coalescing around more of that humanness of how we interact with the company. Because right now it's really this soulless sort of thing in a lot of places where it's not that living organism that kind of develops once you go through, developing in love and compassion and empathy into your business, where it starts to come alive and it becomes this living organism. A lot of times it's sort of just this soulless machine, which is like, it's going to be thinking about stats and thinking about whatever. And just, I'm not going to address this. Do many leaders see bereavement as kind of a personal issue rather than like a business issue?
Not the ones that we talk to.
For sure.
they very much have put
I know you mentioned like
front and center.
That doesn't happen here at this one company.
Yeah, that is true. We do get those. We do get those every now and then. So yeah, I mean, there are environments that are driven by a spreadsheet, the P&L, right? What I think is missing in a lot of those cases is the opportunity to help people outside of the walls to boost that P&L. Your people are the ones that are working with your clients, with your prospects, bringing in business, supporting the business, marketing the business. And if they aren't in the proper headspace for whatever reason, that's going to show up on that P&L, right? And so if you have the opportunity to support them in the ceremonious times and the non-ceremonious times, right? And that might mean things like PTO, and that might mean things like a wedding fund and honeymoon fund and parental leave and things like that. Those are all great things to show that you're going to support them outside of work, but you have to consider that life is not always ceremonious. And there are ways that you can support your employees that will show up on the P&L. And for instance, you mentioned the stat of 51% of people that suffer a close loss leave their employer within 12 months. It costs anywhere from 50% to 200% an annual salary, depending on the role, to replace that employee. I mean, just that alone. So if you think about,
I think this is how we move those soulless companies, is we have to speak the language of the data, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's true. I was the CEO of those ventures. It wasn't just a rank and file employee. I mean, it happens. You don't have it in you. It just takes so much.
I mean, if you think,
incredible.
Just look at the data that says 1 in 9 people suffer a close loss each year. Okay, let's start there, and then say 51% of those leave within 12 months. And that replacement cost, let's call it on average, is 100% of the salary. I mean, that fits on a spreadsheet really, really nicely in just 3 columns, right? You don't even need fancy formulas. And I'm not fast enough to do all the math for a specific size company, but it adds up really, really quickly if you're not thinking about it in a not just an empathetic way, but also in a way that makes sense for your business.
How do we support leaders who, I don't know, it could be someone on the board or even an executive on the team who thinks that perhaps being overly supportive can make them seem soft or could cause employees to be unproductive? Like some people have this mindset, if I show too much, then they're going to just take advantage of that and not do anything. How do we help them through that mindset, which is, it's there, unfortunately, sadly, some people think that way. Yeah.
And they probably think that way. Speaking of empathy, they probably think that way because something has happened in the past where they've been burned in the past, right? At some point, someone called them soft or they did something and somebody didn't like it. And there was some outcome that they internally or externally said, it's never going to happen again. So I think for me, if I'm in that seat and somebody says that to me and we're just having a direct one-to-one conversation, I'm going to ask why they think that. And tell me about a time when that showed up, because my hunch is that not only showed up, but it probably didn't get a whole lot of reflection as to why it actually happened. Because those situations can be pretty emotional. So I think, this is like an overcoming sales objection type of thing, right? But like digging into why somebody has those feelings, I think is really important. It's usually probably about perception more than it is about reality, and helping a leader uncover that type of outlook I'd say, is probably the fastest way to making change, I would imagine, because it sounds to me, anybody with that strong of opinion on that topic, you're probably not going to change their mind just by arguing with them and give them some stats.
The sad thing is that even that individual requires empathy, because they probably went through something where they were vulnerable and someone took advantage of it, and they have some trauma around it. But that's a whole nother topic for another.
It is, but it plays in very nicely to
now,
everything
for
here.
those leaders who want to, proactively show more compassion. Here's a good question for my audience. Can you share any good support ideas you have witnessed in the workplace besides flowers or kind messages? People who are thinking like, what else can we do? What are some ideas there?
So I'm going to do two things real quick on this. One, I'm going to talk about the workplace and give kind of 4 pieces of our framework. And then I'll also talk about very tactical things that people have shared with us that we have worked into our platform because they are exceptional. From a framework perspective, you think about preparation, right? Being prepared, having a framework, having a process, some sort of document to turn to on how you are going to work through this process. Rather than trying to figure out what to do, you now know just that you can just go execute. The second is communication. Communication is a huge component here, not just with the bereaved teammate, but also the manager, their teammates. Who needs what message and when? Do you need to communicate outside of the business? Do you need to hire a PR firm if it's high profile? There's a lot to think about when it comes to communication that just gets missed. And I've got all sorts of stories we could share there too. The next is organization. So when you think about an employee's experience, they shouldn't really know that you have this framework because things go smoothly. It's kind of like a referee, right? Referee has a great game in a sporting event, and they had a great game because nobody noticed them, right? If they have a bad game, they had a bad game because they are the talk of the game. So you want to have it in the background, quiet but powerful, and building confidence for leaders and managers to deliver good support. And then the fourth is the return to work. This might be, it's either the manager, and we're not quite sure, but it's either the manager reaction or the return to work, which are the most important 2 pieces. Don't know which one is more important yet, but most important piece that we see in how that experience is shaped for the foreseeable future. Is it well thought through? Is it clear? Are there follow-up conversations that are happening? So preparation, communication, organization, and return to work are the 4 kind of themes, if you will. From just some very tactical things, thinking about having a buddy assigned to an employee that's coming back for leave. Have that buddy, if it's if they're on site, have that buddy meet them in the parking lot and walk them in to the building. Maybe they hang out for the first couple hours in the day. Maybe they go to meetings together, right? But a way so that person does not feel alone upon return. We think about maybe there's a conference room or a space in the office where somebody took a phone call and got really bad news. How do you avoid that space for some amount of time? We were told about a person who found out her father passed in a conference room, and the CEO made that conference room off limits until further notice. So that person wouldn't have to go back in there and feel like that experience might be relived within the first couple of weeks or months, which was a pretty cool thing. Yeah. So things like that are really thoughtful, but also free can be really, really impactful to that experience.
We need to have that CEO on the show. That's the kind of people we want to talk to.
I love the stories. I mean, do you have any others that just stand out to you as far as
Yeah. Do you want good or bad?
Yeah. Give us either one, because you mentioned in communication and stuff, and I'm all let's dive into.
Yeah. So think about there's one that's kind of both, right? It starts off really, really good and ends really, really bad. There was a woman who told us about losing her husband, and the employer gave 30 days, no questions asked, 30 days. don't worry about this. We got everything covered. We'll call you in 25 days to get everything squared away for your return on the 30th. If you need more time, you can take more time. If you want to come back earlier, just let us know. But don't feel like you have to communicate. Really just good upfront thoughtfulness around her leave and this traumatic loss that she just experienced. And the way she recounted it to us is that she felt really, really good about the employer, the way they approached it. They were supportive. They talked about it. They said her husband's name. They did all these things really, really well from a communication perspective. She came back 30 days later, and she was a client-facing position. First meeting she gets on, her client says to her, "Hey, it must have been really nice to take a 30-day vacation. Welcome back. You must feel so refreshed." She goes into an internal meeting, and a newer employee says to her, "Hey, I didn't know. I know you've been into the company for a while. I didn't know we offered sabbaticals. Can you tell me about like the sabbatical program?"
Oh my gosh.
So there was this giant miss around communication, right? Starts off really, really well, direct communication to her, but they very much failed in the way that they communicated to everyone else.
Wow.
I love that. I mean, that you guys are getting all these stories, coming in. Not no one else is getting all these stories in like one place. They're all sort of siloed and isolated. So you're able to see, hey, here's a failure, here's a success, and you're able to, like you said, we're thinking about new parts of our product and services based upon, I think, probably a lot of these kind of stories that you get in.
The whole reason a big part of our product exists, I should say that differently. So much of our product exists is because of these stories, right? And these opportunities for employers to consider these moments that really might not cost anything, right? There are some that we've included where actually a woman lost her cousin, and real close to them. It was a very traumatic loss for the way things unfolded. A lot led up to it, and the employer provided her 6 months paid, 6 months of grief counseling, and extended that offer to the immediate family. So they would have paid for 6 months of grief counseling for, I think 6 or 7 people that they kind of offered it for. Like, those things are real and real support, but they are expensive. But there's all these other things that we hear about. It doesn't cost anything to just shut off your conference room for a couple of months, right? Or meet somebody outside in the parking lot. Yeah. So we get all of these stories and we build around those, because even though they might be unique and they might not be applicable to every single situation, we would argue that you should consider these things and whether or not they are applicable to every situation. And that's how you provide an equitable experience.
I really love that idea of meeting someone and sitting with them and keeping them company. It doesn't cost anything to do that either. It's just really so human and so genuine, like a way to show care for someone.
No doubt.
Cool.
Justin, I asked this question of all of our guests. What role does love play in business?
Great question. I think, if you want to have a human culture, you have to consider humans and what humans feel and what humans want. And while they might not expect love as we might know it from a personal perspective, there are certainly ways to show love through things like benefits, through things like care, through things like celebrations, things like support. And I think from a cultural perspective, when you talk about attraction and retention and productivity, those things are going to go a long way on that part of your P&L. And so I would direct it obviously for business leaders who don't think love fits, I would direct it specifically to how it could show up on the P&L, like Stephen, I think you mentioned earlier. So it's probably a pretty big unlock for a lot of companies who aren't showing those types of things, but might be talking about it instead.
It's been a great conversation. Thanks for sharing your stories, and for anyone tuning in who wants to learn more about Bereave, where should they go?
They can go to bereave.io. And there's plenty of information there. There's some free tools. We don't gate our tools, so you can download some checklists and download other tools that are there, quizzes, etc. And you don't have to worry about me coming after you to try to become a customer. If you want to, you will be.
Yeah, well, hopefully they do. Thank you, Justin, and thank you to our listeners for joining us today. If this episode helped you think differently about connection, about leadership, about supporting your team through life's toughest moments, be sure to share this to someone who may need it, or like and subscribe and all that for sure. Until next time, we'll see you on the Bliss Business Podcast.